The last video explained that the break-even point is where sales are equal to fixed costs plus the associated variable costs. You may be wondering then, how is it possible to have variable costs that exceed the break-even point? This video will explain just that. The question is, if the break-even point occurs when sales equals the variable costs added to the fixed costs, how can the break-even point be lower than the variable costs? It has everything to do with the amount of your sales at any given moment in time. In other words, the break-even point does not change as long as the contribution margin doesn't change, but as sales continue to rise, so do the variable costs. We will explain using just the basic principles and a simplified graph. Creating the graph, we have dollars on the y-axis and the number of units sold on the x-axis. As more units are sold, more revenue is taken in. The more that you sell, the higher your variable costs will be. Fixed costs such as electricity and staff benefits such as health insurance do not change based upon sales volume, so they remain stable and do not fluctuate. They are fixed. Notice how both the revenue and variable cost lines start at zero when nothing yet has been sold. Fixed costs, however, start at a higher point or value even if nothing yet has been sold. This shows us that the cost for things like electricity and other utilities still need to be paid even if nothing is sold. Now, total costs. Total costs are fixed costs plus the variable costs. Fixed costs are included at the start point, and then any increase to total costs are due to the variable costs. This is why the total cost slope and the variable cost slope are the same. If this does not make sense, pause the video momentarily to think about it and replay the video if needed. When the total cost line intersects with the revenue line, it marks the location where fixed costs plus variable costs are equal to sales, otherwise known as our break-even point. Prior to this point, we have been operating at a loss, meaning that we have not yet sold a sufficient quantity of units to cover our fixed and variable costs. The break-even point identifies where this begins to change. Sales that occur after the BEP start generating a true profit. Do not confuse the profit made on each sale with this profit. Up until the BEP or break-even point, any profit from each sale is put towards paying the fixed and variable costs. In other words, if you sell one item for $1 and your variable costs are 25 cents, your profit is 75 cents on that one item. But if you have unmet fixed costs of $2, that 75 cents must first be put towards that fixed cost. So essentially, you're still operating at a loss. Back to the graph. Notice that as we continue to sell units, our revenue and our variable costs continue to increase. Once the break-even point is reached, it is possible that variable costs can exceed the BEP. This is because revenue received from each sale covers the variable cost, with the remaining revenue going directly to profit. So what it comes down to is this. Once the BEP is met, any continued sales will lead to continued increasing variable costs, but also to increased profits. Wrapping up, the break-even point is where sales received meet the fixed costs of the business added to the variable costs associated with producing those sales. As long as the contribution margin remains the same, your break-even point will not change. As sales continue past the break-even point, it is possible and even likely that the variable costs will exceed that break-even point. This is due to the dynamic relationship between sales and their associated variable costs. RDStudy.com video tutorials are produced and owned by Nutrition News Network, LLC. Any copying, reuse, or redistribution, in full or in part for any purpose without the written consent of Nutrition News Network, LLC, is prohibited. All rights reserved.